That's pretty gross. Hey everybody, it's Wednesday night. I'm glad you're here with me. My name is RB, which stands for Rainbow. I'm a creation of God, and I'm a promise. But we're not going to talk about the promise tonight. I'm going to talk about some dirty stuff. That's gross. Do you see all those worms? I was thinking about dirty things like that, and I was thinking about dirty socks. That's probably the most stinky thing that I have in my room. Dirty socks. What about you? Do you have dirty socks in your room that are super stinky? I know you do. Maybe you have stinky feet. Do you have stinky feet? Maybe you have a stinky bathroom. Anyway, so we were going to talk about dirty jobs today, and I wondered if you would like to have a dirty job. What do you think are the most dirty jobs? Go ahead and answer me. Tell me what you think is the most dirty job that you could possibly do. I found a list of some of the dirtiest jobs. Here they are. Here they are. Nothing. Oh, there's one. Miner. That's a dirty job. Can you see that guy's head? Covered in coal. That'd be a dirty job. Would you like to be a miner and dig in the ground and look for coal? Another dirty job, if you want to guess the second dirtiest job, is oil rig worker. That guy is dirty. Super, super, super dirty. Covered in oil. Yuck. I don't think I could wash that out of my beautiful hair. Number 3 would be to work in sewage, which is poo-poo. This poor guy lives in Bangladesh, and he works in the sewage department. I think we ought to pray for him. Blech. That's probably the worst one on this list. What about diapers? Diapers, that's a dirty job. That's why everybody tries to get out of doing diapers. But any kind of bodily fluid is kind of a dirty thing. When you think about it, doctors and nurses and moms and dads, they deal with vomit, they deal with poo-poo, they deal with all kinds of accidents. We should thank them. Thank you, Jesus, and thank you, Mama. Anyway, what else there's? Laundry. That's a dirty job. I hope some of you do their laundry at home. Do you do laundry? It's a necessary job to get the dirt away. One more. Garbage. Everybody makes garbage. We just throw things away. Probably too much. And I hope you recycle. That's a good idea. All that garbage has to be picked up by somebody. Would you like to work with garbage? I understand they make pretty good money. Most things that are hard pay pretty good. And if it's dirty, a lot of times it pays pretty good too. So here's the question for you. Maybe you want to stop the video and you could ask yourselves a question. What would it take for me to do that job? What would it take for me to do that kind of work? I don't think so. But anyway, what would it take for you to do it? And then we're going to ask Pastor Tim what he thinks and what it would take for him to do one of these dirty jobs. So everybody go ahead and say, "Hey, Pastor Tim." Good job. I see him. He's coming.
Hi, boys and girls. Thank you, RB, and I appreciate that. This is a good topic. I like this. Talking about dirty jobs. That's a good idea, and I like the discussion of dirty jobs. I don't personally want to do any of those jobs, but somebody has to do dirty jobs, right? I mean, and their life is full of dirt, and it has to be done. So we are really thankful for everyone that does those. So your question, what would be The dirtiest job I've ever done, if I really think about it, maybe working on a couple toilets. There was a mission trip in Chicago where we had to clean up sewage that had backed up all over the floors of, I think it was a church. And that was pretty gross. It stank. It did not smell good. So that might have been the worst thing, the dirtiest job that I can think of doing at the moment. But there's a lot of dirty jobs. And that's what we're going to talk about, is doing the dirty jobs, the dirty work that nobody wants to do. There's lots of them. And we're going to be in John chapter 13. So if you don't have a Bible out, go get it. And if it's not in the room, go ahead and pause it. Come back to me. All right. Hopefully you're back with me, and we're going to look at John chapter 13, and we're going to read about Jesus and how he was willing to do the dirty work that a lot of people are not willing to do in life. Go ahead and read with me. John chapter 13, verse 1 says, "Before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that his hour had come to depart from this world to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end." So let's first start with dealing with Passover. Do you know what Passover is? Passover is a meal that Jewish people still celebrate today. And we still celebrate it today, and it usually happens around Easter time. You may, if you have Jewish friends, and in some churches, and our church even, has had a Passover meal to help us understand. Because Passover is an event that happens in the Bible, happens in the Old Testament. Do you remember the Passover? The Passover is an event that happens during the exodus of the Jews from Egypt. Remember all the 10 plagues that God gives to the Egyptians in order to persuade them to let his people go? The last and the most terrible plague was the plague of death. And if they would slaughter a lamb, and if they would place the blood on the doorframes of their homes, that the Lord, that angel of death, would pass over. And that's where that term comes from. And then they had created a meal that God commanded in the Old Testament that Jews observe that would help them to remember how God had saved them from slavery. That is the Passover. Today, we actually still celebrate a piece of that. Do you know what we do in the church today as Christians that celebrates the remembrance of that freedom that we have received in Jesus Christ? Communion. Very good. When we take the bread and the cup, we are actually partaking of two of the elements of Passover. We're partaking of the redemption of our own lives, and in understanding that Jesus explained it in further detail, and that we're remembering that he is the redemption, that he is the Passover lamb, that Jesus is the one that was slain. And that's why we celebrate Passover today. So, Jesus was celebrating Passover. Good to remember. All right, and this is also when Jesus told his disciples to partake of communion. If you go down to verse 4 with me, it says, "And he got up from supper, and he laid his robe aside." So he took out the outer cloak. He took the robe off, and he would have like an undergarment on, not just like underwear, kind of more like a smaller robe typically. All right, and he would take a towel and he wrapped it around himself. So he took off his nice clothes. All right, now this might be strange. If you were having dinner with your friends and all of a sudden the host takes off some of his clothes, what is that guy doing? And you might wonder, why is Jesus taking off his clothes? Well, he's taking off his clothes for the same reason that maybe your mom or your dad do this. Your mom or your dad have one of these? An apron? This is my wife's apron. It is almost too small. I cannot tie it. There. All right. An apron has a purpose. Do you know what the apron's purpose is? The apron's purpose is to keep me from getting dirty, right? And in that time, it was more difficult to clean clothes. They didn't have washers and dryers. And so in order to keep clothes clean, sometimes they just take them off. And that would be easier. Today, we don't just take our clothes off when we're doing dirty work. Instead, what we do is we put on things like aprons and work clothes and things like that in order to keep them clean. And that's what he was doing. So he took off his clothes so that he could get to work, so that he would put on his working gloves, right? His cleaning gloves, because he was going to get to doing some cleaning, all right? And this might be the appropriate clothes for cleaning at your house, And this might be what Jesus would do if he lived today. But instead, he was taking this stuff off. All right, so that's verse 4. Verse 5 says, next, he poured water into a basin and he began to wash the disciples' feet. And then he dried them with a towel. And he tied the towel that he had tied around him. Jesus began doing a dirty job. What was he doing? He was washing the feet of the disciples. Now you have to understand too, at that time their feet were probably dirtier than yours and mine, because we walk a lot on sidewalks and the streets and paved areas. They walked just in dirt roads, and they walked in just their feet. They didn't even have socks. So as they sweat, it just, into the mud and into the dirt, and it caked on their feet, because that's what they had. Just these sandals, and so their feet would have dirt on it from the whole day. You can imagine maybe, and you've done this, maybe just played in the backyard for hours in your bare feet. Your feet are just grimy, aren't they? By the end of the day, can you imagine if you'd spent days like that? Your feet would be really dirty. So Jesus cleans their feet. It seems strange, and it seems strange maybe to you. It seemed really strange to Peter, because Peter had a problem with it, and you can see that in verse 6. He came to Simon Peter as he was washing their feet, who asked him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? Clearly he did not like this idea. Jesus answered him, what I'm doing you don't understand, but afterward you will know. Peter said, you'll never wash my feet, not ever. Does anyone else feel that way about their feet? They just don't want people touching them. They're like, please don't touch my feet. They're stinky, they're sweaty, they're gross. Don't touch my feet. I think maybe Peter had a complex about his feet, and he does not want Jesus, certainly his master, to clean his stinky feet. And I think we can all understand that. Peter had a problem with this, and he understood that Jesus was way too important and way too good. And he was such an honorable and loving and personable man. He's like, you cannot be my servant who would clean my feet. This would be like if Jesus came to your house with the rubber gloves and the apron and said, I need to clean your toilets. How would you feel about that? Most of you, and especially like my wife, and probably some of the women in your homes would say, no way, Jesus, you're not even coming into my house until I clean those toilets. But he says, no, you've got to let me clean. I want to clean the most filthy part of your home. I want to clean the filthiest part of your body. And that's what I have to do. That's what Jesus was basically saying. He then says, if I don't wash you, you have no part with me. Simon Peter then said, Lord, don't just wash my feet, but my hands and my head. The one who has bathed, Jesus told him, doesn't need to wash everything except his feet, but he is completely clean. He says, you are clean, but not all of you. For he knew who would betray him, and that was Judas. This is why he said, you are not all clean. He then explains this whole teaching, like why is he doing all this cleaning? Why is he getting into work clothes and doing such a dirty job? Like what's Jesus trying to teach us? And this is very important. So make sure you focus on this next couple verses, verse 12 through really through 17, but we're just going to read 12 through 15. When Jesus had washed their feet, he put on his robe. He reclined again, and he said, do you know what I've done for you? He said, do you understand what I'm doing? You call me teacher and Lord, and that's well said, for I am. So if I am your Lord and your teacher, and I have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example, so that you should do just as I have done for you. Jesus says that I am the Lord and I am washing your feet. Did you hear what he's saying? He's saying, understand what I just did. This is a picture for you to understand. I am your Lord and I wash feet. Then he says, so if you are a follower of me, what should you do? Do you know? You should wash feet. You should wash feet because Jesus is a servant. And this is what Jesus is trying to teach. Jesus is willing to put on an apron. Jesus is willing to get out the work gloves. Jesus is willing to put on the helmet and to do the dirtiest, grossest jobs that are out there. He's not afraid to do hard work. That's a good one for us to remember. A lot of us don't like to work. Do you like to work? When your mom or your dad asks you to do some work around the house, would you help clean the sink or would you help do some laundry? Do you go, ugh? Or do you say, okay, and help? Jesus wasn't afraid of work. In fact, the Bible teaches us that we were designed to work. Even before sin, and a result of sin is that work would become hard, but even before sin, there was work for Adam and Eve to do. They were to tend the garden. And I don't know what that exactly looked like because they didn't have weeds, but maybe they were just making the garden beautiful and they were keeping things healthy. But they had a job to do, and they did it with joy because it was easy. Work today is a little harder than it was meant to be. But Jesus teaches us that work is something that we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be servants, and especially if you're a follower of Jesus. If you're a follower of Jesus, that means you're going to be like Jesus. And what did Jesus do? Jesus did dirty work. He did the dirty jobs. He was unafraid of doing things that were hard. So first of all, I want to encourage you to not be so afraid of doing work. It's what we were made to do. We're made to work, and work is typically harder than not working. And now I want you to take a minute and think about how you can serve like Jesus did. Jesus served by cleaning people's feet. What could you do to practice being a servant? How could you be a servant in your home? How could you be a servant to your neighbor? How could you serve at your church? What could you do? I bet there are lots of ways that you can serve. You know, one way that you can serve others is you can just help them do the things that they need to do. You can help your family get to church. It's always hard for moms and dads to get to church, but you can help. You can help your family get the chores done. It's always hard to get the chores done, and there's always a mess. And when your parents remind you to do some of the chores that maybe you forgot, you can be happy to do them because you can be like Jesus. You're unafraid of work, and you know that this is a way to show people that you love them. This is the message of God for us tonight, and it's a good one. We need to serve. It is part of what we were created for. It is how He shows us that He loves us. And this is how we should love Him, by serving others. God bless you, boys and girls. I hope you talk about these with your families and your friends. Talk about ways that you can serve in your home, ways that you can serve in your community. Maybe even ask each other for a challenge and say, hey, what do you think I could do to be a servant? God bless you. Keep serving. Don't be afraid of the dirty jobs. Someone's got to do them.